The southwestern side of Cape Breton Island is the heartbeat of Cape Breton music and the Gaelic language. It may not be as well known to hikers as places like Cape Breton Highlands National Park, but it's still an absolutely beautiful place to explore. It's also where you'll find the village of Mabou, and that's where I'm picking up the Celtic Shores Trail to start my walkabout today. This corridor opened as a rail line in 1901 that ran from Inverness to Port Hastings. The primary purpose of that line was to carry coal from mines in Inverness and Mabou all the way to the Port Hastings coal pier, where it would be loaded on ships and transported out of the Strait of Canso. Interestingly, the contract to build this railway line also included building the colliery in Inverness. The railway also ended up helping farmers. In this very area, there was at one time a siding where rail cars were put on another track and farmers could unload farm machinery and fertilizer, filling them back up with lumber and agricultural products for sale. The railway peaked in 1908. Most of its cargo was coal, but lumber was also quite important. During World War I, the mining operations in this part of Cape Breton worked overtime. While the railway stumbled after the war, there was hope when CN leased the line in 1924 and then purchased it 5 years later. The construction of the Canso Causeway in 1955 meant the line received an upgrade and was connected to the Truro to Sydney line. But the dream wasn't to last. The last passenger train to run on this line was just 4 years later in 1959. Freight service continued in a limited capacity, but it dwindled, and in 1975, CN sought to abandon the line, which only had a single customer by that point. It's not really clear where the name Mabou comes from, though it was in use in the early 1700s. It was primarily the fishing that brought families here, though the mining opportunities that would eventually bring the railway were certainly known in the 1700s, at least as far as coal is concerned. Many settlers came here from the United States during the Revolutionary War. There were a number of canning factories in Mabou for fish products over the years, though the area really became known for agriculture and forestry. This area, right back to Port Hood, saw American settlers ultimately joined by Irish and British in the late 1700s. You know, Mabou certainly has a strong Gaelic tradition, and obviously that includes music. To visitors, it almost seems like everybody can either play the fiddle, play the pipes, or sing. Sometimes you even wonder whether people are born with the ability to play an instrument. And they've preserved the old, ancient Gaelic songs here, and in many cases have created a Cape Breton style rooted in that Gaelic tradition that is recognizable worldwide. In the first half of the 1800s, Gaelic Highland Scots began arriving, bringing with them the Scottish traditions. The Gaelic language has survived here despite a long time with little support, and even hostility in some cases from the outside world. Mabou, among its settlers, had many poets and musicians. Alexander MacDonald was one of those early Gaelic descendants. He was actually born in Mabou and then ultimately moved to the mainland somewhere near Antigonish. He was also a poet, and he wrote a poem, originally in Gaelic, that speaks to many Cape Bretoners who have left this island. The reason for my sadness is that I left that place forever, in the north, across the sea, that isle where I was raised, where I was brought up. My people were happy there. Of all the places I ever visited, I gave my heart to Mabou. Music really is important in the Mabou area, and perhaps one of the best-known music exports from this area is the Rankin family. Behind me in the hills is a community called Rankinville, and if you know the Rankins' music, you've probably heard of the Mull River Shuffle. Well, that's the Mull River. You may not immediately think of Cape Breton Island as a hotspot for cattle and sheep farming, but during the 1800s, cheese and butter making was a major industry in Mabou. They were even exporting product as far away as Newfoundland. Today, 3 of the largest cattle herds on all of Cape Breton Island are found here in Mabou, and farming remains an important industry. There were many mills producing flour, and Mabou was once even an exporter of flour. Not surprisingly, it was improvements in transportation that put an end to a lot of the agricultural ventures, as it became cheaper to import products. This is one of many old railway bridges that this trail crosses. This one goes over Glendyre Brook. This trail winds its way through many communities. After the break, I'm going to be continuing on to Inverness along this line as I leave the Mabou Rivers portion of this trail. It makes me think back to Alexander MacDonald, that poet who was born so many years ago in Mabou. The last stanza of his poem could very well have been written about this railway and the way it became a trail and the connection it still has to communities. Now that they have the railroad, I shall go there forthwith to see all those who survive of those I left behind in Mabou.
Won't you be mine? Feel the sunshine.
Sometimes you find things along trails that you don't expect, and I had no idea this little graveyard was here. The dates go back to the 1800s. They're probably second generation for the most part in this area. This is a whole family. There's the mother and father, but on this side, the children, 6 months, 5 months, 30 years, 31 years. I'm making my way along the Celtic Shores Trail in southwestern Cape Breton. It's along an old rail line that was abandoned, but the route still remains. About 12 years ago, in 2008, 5 sections of the trail were opened under the Trans-Canada and Appalachian Trails banners. The Celtic Shores Trail is actually a combination of 5 trail sections along the old railway. The Cayley Coastal Trail, the Judique Flyer Trail, the Chestico Trail, the Mabou Rivers Trail, and the Inverness Chien Trail. It's the latter 2 I'm hiking today. All 5 segments together cover about 92 kilometers. The 2 sections I'm visiting will cover about 35 kilometers of that length. Cape Breton is known for its hills, But because this was an old rail line, the grades on this route are very easy. There is no part of this trail that will tax your muscles because of a hill, and if you're riding your bike, you can be sure you won't have to walk through a tough spot. Every kilometer on the trail is marked, and you can tackle this trail in many ways, including hiking, by bike, by horse, or in winter, by snowshoe. This is the community of Strathlorn. In 1840, one of the earliest post offices in Cape Breton was established here. It was called the Broad Cove Intervale Post Office. The name changed to Strathlorn in 1879. The railway that used this line also had a passenger station very close to where I'm walking right now. Lake Ainslie is a big lake which drains north to the Margaree, a popular fishing river, and to the ocean. Maybe Big Lake is an understatement. In fact, it's the largest freshwater lake in all of Nova Scotia, at 20 kilometers long and 5 kilometers wide. It's named after George Robert Ainslie, who was Lieutenant Governor of Cape Breton from 1816 to 1820. Now, 1820 is when Cape Breton became part of Nova Scotia and ceased to have its own Lieutenant Governor. It's a little strange that such a prominent feature was named after Ainslie. Ainslie was by no means a success. He had come to Cape Breton by way of a demotion after a less than successful military career. It's said it was Ainslie's mismanagement of the Cape Breton colony's finances in his role as Lieutenant Governor that left little choice but for Cape Breton to become part of Nova Scotia on October 16, 1820. At the upper end of the lake is an area called Loch Band. The geology in this area comes from debris deposited by retreating glaciers. Much of it isn't that old, at least in geologic terms, around 25,000 to 12,500 years old. You hear the word ceilidh used a lot in this part of Cape Breton. These days it's really used to denote a large music festival or large gathering. But originally, a ceilidh was an informal gathering or even a kitchen party, something which is still common in this part of Cape Breton. This is the Deepdale Trestle Bridge. It was built in 1901, and it's said that it took 100 men all summer to build it above the Broad Cove River below. It was originally built of wood, but it was upgraded to steel in the 1930s. Well, the bridge itself, it's about 100 meters long, and it sits 25 meters above the surface of the river below. These days, the trail portion has been reconstructed of wood, just like in the original bridge. The Celtic Shores Trail ends in Inverness, which is a little more than a kilometer ahead of me. I've come 35 kilometers along this trail since Mabou, and there are plans to take this trail beyond Inverness and connect it further north to other trails, many of which I visited in the past. The history of coal in Inverness is one of perseverance. Coal had been identified in the area at least as far back as the early 1800s and likely as far back as the 1700s. But it was not until the late 1800s that a man named William Penn Hussey, a Massachusetts coal broker, moved to the area and opened a coal mine. He dredged the harbor to achieve a channel to the Gulf of St. Lawrence and built a narrow gauge railway to the harbor. Several mines opened along the route this trail runs, though none were as well known to most Nova Scotians as the ones near Sydney and industrial Cape Breton. Most of the coal mines in this area closed following World War II, though one did stay open until the 1990s. This boardwalk along the beach in Inverness brings me to the end of the Celtic Shores Trail and the end of my journey for today. It's been a journey through time, through immigration, forestry and agriculture, music, and everything that makes Cape Breton special. Tomorrow I'll be headed to another part of Cape Breton, to a trail that's also steeped in history and is full of amazing natural wonders. After spending the night in Inverness after finishing the Celtic Shores Trail yesterday, I'm on my way across Cape Breton Island. And everybody tells me that Dancing Goat is a place I need to try. Wow, what a busy and popular spot. But I can tell you, looking in that baked goods cabinet, whew, I can't wait to try my lemon tart in here, and even got some coffee to take home. Anyways, with something for the road, it's now off towards Louisbourg.
Oh, come on, won't you be mine? Feel the sunshine.
I've made it across Cape Breton Island to Louisbourg and the Louisbourg Lighthouse Coastal Trail. I'm standing here across Louisbourg Harbour from Fortress Louisbourg National Historic Site. This lighthouse is on the site of the first lighthouse ever in Canada. Now the trail includes a 2-kilometer loop plus an additional 3 kilometers that will take you further down the coast. This site is incredibly important. It played very important roles in both sieges of Louisbourg, including the placement of cannons for British forces as they attacked the fort and tried to take it over. Behind me is the foundation from the original 1734 lighthouse. It was damaged a number of times by fire over the years until ultimately being destroyed during the second siege of Louisbourg in 1758. There were some other lighthouses on this site, including one right about here, and this would have been the lighthouse keeper's home. Those were also destroyed. And then in the 1920s, this lighthouse was built. And finally, in 1926, a brass plaque was put here to remember that original lighthouse, which would be the first lighthouse ever in Canada. Of course, back then, it wasn't Canada yet. Just before 1730, the Fortress of Louisbourg built a battery out on those islands. Now, the purpose of that battery was to protect the harbor using crossfire from the fort and the battery from any invading forces. And by the time 1745 rolled around, that battery was actually responsible for repelling forces from New England. But in 1758, cannons fired from this very spot by British forces silenced the battery forever. This is the formal start to the trail, a trail that's managed by a local community organization. It's so incredibly peaceful on the shoreline today. It's hard to think about what this must have looked like in 1745 and 1758 when Brigadier General James Wolfe of the British forces had his crews dragging cannon up against these shores and then dragging them across this land to the lighthouse, all so they could bombard that island battery. It's amazing how these landscapes and the uses change over time. It's a beautifully clear and calm day here today. You can see right to the horizon, but that's certainly not always the case. Often this area is completely fogged in. So much so that the Mi'kmaq name for Cape Breton is Unama'ki, which means land of the fog. It's fall and it does not feel like Christmas today. It's actually a really nice warm day. But cranberries make me think of Christmas. Growing up, we had the popcorn and the cranberry strings that would wrap around the Christmas trees. In this bog are cranberries. And occasionally when you're walking the trail, you'll see people carrying buckets and wearing rubber boots, which seems like really odd hiking attire, but it's because they've come to go cranberry picking down here. At this point in the hike, I've reached Gun Landing Cove and I have two options. I can either continue the main loop back to the lighthouse, which is what I plan to do, or if I had a bit more time, there's a 3-kilometer rougher hike that I could take all the way down to Lorraine Head. If I was really ambitious, I could continue on to Little Lorraine from there. Now, the plan of the community group and the area residents is to actually improve that trail all the way to Lorraine Head and make it much more like what I was just hiking on. That's something I wouldn't mind trying on another day. This is Gun Landing Cove, and beyond it is Wolf Cove. Gun Landing Cove was so named because, well, they landed guns here. The French were so worried about the British landing their cannon here that they actually dug emplacements around here and put cannon batteries. Ultimately, the British were able to land their cannons further down the coast and bring them in from behind, which caused the French to abandon their position here. The sound of the waves today is very peaceful, soothing almost. I mean, just imagine what it would have been like hundreds of years ago with cannon fire just ringing through these rocks. Like so many places you can hike and explore, these rocks have been here for hundreds of millions of years. They've witnessed glacial change. They've been present for fierce battles. And these days, they're present for hikers and watching cranberry pickers. They hold memories that last millions of years. So wherever your next walkabout takes you, may it grant you memories that last a lifetime.
Sunshine.